Hello, listeners and readers of awardswatch.com. This is Executive Editor Ryan McQuaid, and here is my in-depth conversation with Wake Up Dead Man writer, director, producer Rian Johnson. Well, it's wonderful to see you again and talk about another one of these wonderful Knives Out Benoit Blanc mysteries.
Thanks.
And I wanted to start from just the origin of all of this. And when did you first think about taking us back to church, as you said at TIFF? When was the thought process of wanting to go to this setting for this mystery?
Well, it started with wanting to make it personal, and wanting to after we had a blast making Glass Onion. We're really proud of it. It's what we set out to make, but it felt like it would be nice to ground the next one, just to get a little bit of I don't know. It felt like just to shake it up for ourselves, grounding the next one to make sense. So for me, that meant making it personal. Faith and religion is something that's very personal to me. I grew up very, very Christian, and not just being raised in a faith, but personally, I was a Protestant evangelical, and I was all about God. I was my relationship with Christ really is the lens that I saw the world through. Up until my early 20s, and I'm no longer a believer. So that leads to a lot of really strong, very complicated feelings about faith. So the initial thing was, well, is it possible? The challenge was, can I kind of talk about that not in a didactic or just facile way, but hopefully in a way that's actually as multifaceted and generous and complicated as my feelings about the subject? Can I talk about that in the context of a big, entertaining Benoit Blanc mystery that still invites the big tent in for a good time? And that seemed like a huge, interesting challenge that would be kind of thrilling to try and pull off.
Within that, when you start realizing that's when you do, and we're going to obviously talk about the faith stuff because I think that that's such an important factor of this. But jumping off, I know that the genre has many interpretations, inspirations for yourself in terms of from novels, from films. And we talked about that a lot when we talked about Glass Onion the last time we spoke. I'm curious for this, for the more spiritual yet darker tone, were there not just literary inspirations for this, but different film inspirations that you went to tap into the tone and the vibe you're going for this one?
Well, I did look at yeah, tonally with film there were some touch points. There was a and I tended to look at older kind of gothic tinged movies. There's a great Ida Lupino movie called Ladies in Retirement that I got kind of obsessed with, and but there's a whole, I think Criterion actually, when I was writing, just happened to have a whole series of kind of I forget what they called them, like Gothic Noir or something like that. And it was all a series, all these movies that were set like on the Scottish, like on the moors, basically.
Hmm.
Rebecca also, but the real influences were actually literary. I mean, the two big ones are the Father Brown mysteries by G.K. Chesterton and the works of John Dixon Carr, who we name check in the movie.
Hmm.
And Carr's interesting because he both has that gothic tone, but he specializes in this little subset of the genre, the impossible crime. For me, it was the combo plate of talking about faith and doing it through the conduit of a, a murder that was created to look like a miracle. That seemed like that was a potent combo for the theme.
I'm curious also getting into the faith about this game of wits that Father Judd has to kind of go into against munching your wicks when he's first introduced to it, and how it's a different way of manipulating and maneuvering the text and how one preaches one's viewpoint onto the world, and it becomes this chess match between the two of them. And it feels as if like there's a battle of ideals that are between these two men, and that then leads to this anger bubbling up inside that Wix is trying to get at. Could you talk a little bit about the battle between these two and ultimately the approach of what Father Judd has to face in terms of
Yeah.
just the way the message is being preached to him and how and to the congregation.
Yeah. I mean, for me, part of the reason I felt um, comfortable delving into all this stuff, like I said, is just because it's personal to me and it's stuff that I have both sides inside me. So having been raised in an evangelical household, growing up as a kid in the 80s during the Reagan years, uh, there was both. There was the love of Christ, there was the forgiveness, there was the selflessness, and then there was also this slightly politically tinged war footing that we were told we had to be on, that felt very much that felt oftentimes it led to um, attitudes towards our fellow human beings that felt very at odds with this other side that we were being taught, at least to me at the time. And so for me, it was a form of therapy to have this first act where I create two opposite poles of those things and let them come together and kind of attack each other. And for me, it's much more beyond, it goes far beyond the notion of the nice guy versus the fire and brimstone guy. For me, it's a fundamental difference of approach, which is service versus war. And if service versus fighting. It's this versus this is the basic thing.
Well,
Um, yeah, good. So,
no. I was just going to say because I see it a lot when I was growing up because I was Catholic myself, and I would see, my grandfather would take me to church, and I would see in there a smaller flock of faith that seemed about right and seemed why people would get involved with it in the first place. But then you see these now on television, even beyond in the 80s, you see these evangelicals or you see people on television that are they're spreading more political or individualistic ideals rather than actually the faith. And then it muddies the waters into what should you truly believe?
well, and I think for me it was very important, not in order to not offend anyone,
Yeah.
but in order to have the movie actually resonate. It was very important for me not to just have oh, those bad Christians over there doing that thing, shame on them type attitude towards it. Because the reality is, I fundamentally don't feel that way because I grew up as as a Christian, and I had that inside me as well as all the good stuff. And so I understand um, the feeling of feeling like you're, under siege from the world and that your ideals are not reflected by the world, and the instinct of wanting to fight back against that. I do think that instinct is sometimes taken advantage of by people who harness that in order to uh for whether it's political power or whatever. But I understand where that comes from, I guess. Even if I think ultimately it leads down a path that leads to actions that are antithetical to the teachings of Christ. So yeah, it's and all to say that I hope the movie is generous in spirit, but also generous in even in the way that Wix is. There's an element of that I understand in a way because I've experienced, I've felt that before.
Yeah. I think the other thing that resonated with me a lot when in terms of faith is then the weaponization of fear
Mm.
and how Father Judd is desperate to get his point across to the rest of the group and how then the ensemble really folds out from this fear of being used on the vulnerable. Their vulnerabilities are the things that is what Wix can tap into, and yet they're still because they are such believers, they're they keep coming back And but then it also resonates with, it doesn't have to be just about faith. People's fears are weaponized on a daily basis, and I think that that's what's so brilliant about your films, is that it doesn't have to just be about the subject matter we're seeing. It can be a more broader commentary. And so could you kind of talk about, how in our culture right now fear is being weaponized and people are very vulnerable, and that there aren't many places for people to really trust in institutions
Yeah.
with their vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. And I mean, which is ultimately what, and this is Father Judd's viewpoint, it's something the church should be a respite from. It's
Yeah,
something the church should be a sanctuary from. The notion that you should be able to, that, the church is not welcoming you because you're on the right side or because you're better than anyone or holy. It's welcoming you because you're flawed and you're sinned and it recognizes that. That was the power of Father Brown. The Father Brown mysteries. That's what Chesterton understood. Is Father Brown is not a good detective because he has insight into God. He's a good detective because he has insight into the flawed nature of man and how we are susceptible to fear and we are susceptible to anger and to feelings of resentment and us against them and how that's not a one side or the other thing. That's a human thing. And so this movie specifically focuses on the church on a group in the church, but I think that's something we can recognize in any kind of tribal sort of group that any of us kind of are a part of in our lives.
for sure. Your partnership with Daniel is growing with these films. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he was the only one of the cast to have seen the film before the Toronto premiere, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right.
And I know you guys were joking about that a little bit in an interview I saw, and it kind of keeps the mystery away from the rest of the ensemble until that
It
night. And
floats a little
yeah,
bit.
but I'm curious, this third go round with him, and and talking to him about this project, and specifically since it's so personal. I mean, we do get to see Benoit Blanc have more of a say in terms of his personal beliefs, his religious beliefs, and how they sort of, they offset what is ultimately our protagonist, which is Father Judd. So I'm curious about talking with Daniel, the evolution of fleshing out more for the audience to know about Benoit Blanc in this,
Yeah.
personally, than we have in past films.
Well, I mean, my approach to these is always that I never want to just delve into Blanc's backstory or build out a mythology of Blanc. To me, that feels like that would be a burden for the audience. And I'm really devoted to the idea that Blanc, we reveal Blanc through his actual function in these stories, which as is the detective solving the crime. But his function in these stories is also his relationship with the protagonist, with
Yeah,
Anna in the first one, Janelle in the second one, Josh in this one. Um, and that's where the opportunity comes to kind of delve in deeper. I do think this movie puts him through a bigger personal journey than the others. And there's a scene at the beginning where when Blanc first enters the movie and enters Judge Church, where they have a kind of back and forth about religion, and they're very much on opposite sides. And I had written that as sort of a much gentler little exchange, and it was actually Daniel when we first talked about the script who had the instinct of making Blanc come at religion much harder in that opening scene. And his point was the harder these two define against each other, the more it'll be satisfying to see them find common ground throughout and learn something from each other by the end of the movie. And he was absolutely right. So it's another example of why I'm just so grateful to have a creative partner like him in this, to be in the boat with this guy. I got pretty,
absolutely.
yeah.
Well, you're in the boat with another wonderful ensemble, and at the lead front of that boat in this ensemble is Josh O'Connor, who might be the busiest man in Hollywood.
The
Um,
thing is, I'm glad we got him when we got him because if we went to him today, I doubt we would do
well,
this
he's
movie.
shooting like 900 films right now. He's got like four films out this year. He's got a Spielberg movie coming out next year.
Well, he's working with the best. I mean, Spielberg and Kelly Reichardt and Joel Cohen, and he's
Present
just
company included, Ryan. Present
I
company
don't know
included.
about that. He's working with the best of the best right now. So
Can
and
you
and Yeah, yeah,
Can you
good.
talk a little bit about working with Josh on this one? Because I've read you say this, and I think this is so true for the audience. We do not see Benoit Blanc for, I want to say, like, it feels like 35, 40 minutes of this movie
About
up at
30
the front.
minutes. Yeah.
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 And so it has to be carried by a protagonist here that we really get fully pronounced. Like, we get really his point of view from the get go. We see his journey. We see how he fits in with the rest of this ensemble. And that's put all on the shoulders of not just your incredible writing, but Josh's performance and his
Yeah.
presence on screen. Can you talk a little bit about your collaboration with him and working with him on creating Father Judd?
Yeah, I mean, when you have an actor like Josh, it makes your job very, very easy. I just kind of convinced he can do anything. But he came into, he came into this role with so much enthusiasm and such a kind of generous spirit. On set, he makes it feel effortless. He's one of those guys who just is joking around with Daniel up until they call action, and then suddenly he's in the zone and giving you this beautiful emotional moment. He also, it was fun for me. I mean, at that when we shot, I had seen him in Challengers, which was my favorite movie of that year. I'd seen his performance in La Chimera, which is at the opposite pole of Challengers, but is equally as captivating a performance. Um, but seeing him on set be able to kind of step into Glenn Close kind of said it made her think of Jimmy Stewart, step into kind of like a true leading man role and carry kind of that first act and then through the movie with Daniel, carry it on his shoulders. The and the humor also, that seeing how good he was at comedy was the other real joy, especially when he and Daniel start cooking against each other. I don't know, they share. There's also a similarity between the two of them. Maybe that's just because they both kind of come out of uh, come out of the UK, come out of kind of the British system, and they both have done work in the theater, and they're both trained. I think there's an element of that, but it's for me, it's a complete joy just seeing these two goofballs do their thing.
I think there was like an actors on actors last year with them together, and I think the whole 45 minutes they were just goofing the entire time, and
A
they were
lot
supposed to talk about they were supposed to
of
talk about their movies, and I'm just sitting there going like, oh, this is a preview of what Ryan's gonna have
that.
for us next year, I believe.
Welcome to
But
my life on set.
well, I wanted to talk also about another thing, which I think is in, well, one, Josh has this incredible scene on the phone
Yeah,
with and taking a confession, which I think then leads to um, his the next time he takes multiple confessions in this film, but and they're all tonally different. But he takes a massive confession at the end, and that one I think plays into the idea of forgiveness and the idea of past mistakes or past wrongs and not wanting to carry those burdens on forever or whatever the afterlife is. And that ultimately falls on the shoulders of a legendary actress in Glenn Close. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about working with them on that specific on the climax of the film
yeah,
and Glenn's moment because I think it's quite beautiful,
yeah,
honestly, because it's all three of them, both Blanc, Judd, and Glenn's character, all coming together in that moment
yeah.
to have that the closure needed for the
Well,
audience.
I mean, when we talked earlier a little bit about the notion of can you get a real discussion of faith into a big entertainment of a murder mystery. But for me, that the real thing that you're striving for with it is not just to kind of like hide a heart inside this mechanism. It's for the two of those things to click together like two gears. So for me, the notion of the detective movie part of it, the whodunit part of it, which is Blanc's part, which is in some ways similar to what Judd does in that it's a universe that's been disrupted by an original sin of a murder and there's moral chaos and the detective comes in, he takes everyone's confession, meaning he questions all the suspects. he separates the guilty from the innocent at the end of the whole thing and has the big revelation at the end of revealing and putting the universe back to moral right. But it's gamified and it's something that is very much a me finding the guilty, us against them sort of gamified version of that. And the notion of the contrast of that to Judd, who gets swept up in that as we do as the audience, and then at some point has this reset with the scene with Bridget Everett where he realizes this is not what he's here to do. This might feel good, and this might, uh, in a very fundamental way, that because it goes with the genre that we're watching, it feels good to do this. But this is not what Christ put him on this planet to do, and and turns him around. The notion of reflecting that in the ending scene with Glenn and the idea of I don't know, the idea of Blanc being called upon at the end to sacrifice his very purpose in the story, the thing that is most important, both to him personally, but also the whole reason he's here as a detective is to have his big moment at the end. And the idea of sacrificing the thing that's dearest to him in order to do what Josh did halfway through the movie and give grace and give this person who arguably deserves it the least, the guilty person in this whole thing, to give her a moment of personal grace at the end of her life. Um, that seemed like a really powerful place to try and land the whole thing.
For sure. Beyond also the just, I mean, this is a darker tone, but these movies from everybody I talk to have the most fun on these
That's
sets. And
great.
then when you are in interviews, when I was at the Middleburg Film Festival and I was talking to Nathaniel Johnson, your cousin,
Yeah, Nathaniel.
about the experience of making this. And but I also was just looking, and it's just everybody behind the scenes is
Yeah.
the ones that you've worked with them on multiple films. Daniel's now a mainstay, and then the only thing that
Yeah.
changes are the ensembles. Can you talk a little bit about setting that tone and creating this warming, almost family-like environment, and then also continuously working with the same collaborators behind the scenes,
Yeah.
and what it means to have those constants when the talent in the front is changing constantly through at least these films, but let alone throughout your career with other ensembles.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it all comes back to, I grew up making movies with my friends. That's what we did on the weekends, and not in order to break into the business or anything. That's just how we hung out. And so that's one thing that I feel the most proud of in my career is that my sets I still want them to feel that way, and they have. I mean, a lot of it is also just Daniel and I really try and set a tone on set. I think with our casts, we've both been lucky, but also there's an element of it being a self-selecting process because we're going after movie stars who are usually number one on the call sheet. If they're
Hmm.
signing up for one of these, they're signing up because they're excited to be part of an ensemble. And so no one's coming in with an ego. Nobody's coming in with any goal other than to be part of this weird little summer stock theater company, enjoy their fellow actors, and have a good time. And so I think that does a lot of the heavy lifting for us in creating that tone on set. And I hope that translates to the audience. I mean, we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff in this interview, but I, I think this is still, like I said, the main goal of it was to do all this and also have it be funny, have it be a big entertainment. And I think you can tell when the actors are having fun, even in the context of a bigger emotional story that you're landing.
No, it's an extremely hilarious film, just like the rest of the other ones. But it also is carrying these heavy themes in here.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to. I mean, obviously, I know you're taking a break from this, and I don't know where the next road takes you, but I assume that you and Daniel are 100% ready to go when the next one is idea pops into your head. Yes,
Yeah,
after some
yeah,
time,
absolutely.
right?
No, yeah, yeah, man. We're both. I think. I don't know. I guess I can speak for myself, but I would guess Daniel feels the same. I feel energized after this one.
Yeah.
It feels really like. I feel really, really jazzed about the possibilities going forward, and the notion that, if I can take this thing that was the most sort of deeply personal and complicated, one of the most personal, complicated things in my life, and feel like I can have this outlet in one of these
Mm.
movies. God, what else can they do?
Yeah.
It's exciting.
I just got a couple more for you.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
The one thing I love seeing about your presence, not just as a filmmaker, but online,
yeah.
is you are a real champion, not only for your films and the theatrical experience and everything, and seeing these mysteries in a theater with an audience,
Yeah.
but championing other filmmakers. I saw your comments the other night about Edgar's new film,
Yeah.
um, Guillermo's new film.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think I've also seen your thoughts on Paul Thomas Anderson's film as well this year.
Oh my God.
Um, I think I saw everybody's comments from the
I
cast
know.
on the
I
red
was,
carpet in London for that film because
yeah,
everybody agreed how incredible that thing is.
absolutely.
I wanted to ask you how important it is to champion and celebrate cinema right now in a time where it could be very cynical about movies being made, about the world that we're living in. How
Yeah.
important do you feel with the platform that you have to celebrate independent cinema where you started off, blockbuster cinema, IP cinema that you've also created, but then also creating your own original stories, which is what you've done for the majority of your career?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, when I only post about something when I get really excited about the experience I had in that theater. And I'm like, and so I guess that's the only thing I'd say is it's not advocacy, and it's not like, I'm not saying you're saying it was, but I feel like sometimes it can feel like I feel like you can't uh
You can
I
feel
feel
the performance in the
Well,
message,
even
or
more, even more than that, I feel like the only thing that gets audiences to theaters is the fact that they're having a great time going to theaters.
yeah.
And telling audiences you should go to theaters, you should support the theatrical experience, then that's just lecturing, and that doesn't work. The reality is I'm communicating sort of, just the thrill that I felt watching one battle after another with a full crowd in a big theater. And I think the thing is, I know there's a lot of doom and gloom. I'm genuinely optimistic right now because I feel like a lot of people are feeling that. I feel like especially young people right now. You go to screenings, you go to even revival screenings of like older films. You see it packed with young people who want to have that thrill of being in a crowded theater and experiencing a good story. So, uh, so yeah, I think celebrating it and kind of sharing it, but I feel like I'm riding the wave of that right now, as opposed to, marching with a sign or something. I feel like there's a tidal wave right now of people wanting to get back in big groups and have a blast in the theater.
There's got to be a little bit of hope when you see the lines outside of TIFF or at these other festivals of people standing in those Criterion vans, trying to get their,
Yeah.
the Criterions there, and they're all 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds. They're all
I mean,
wanting to talk
yeah,
about independent, foreign, international cinema, you
totally.
know.
Even outside of the film festival circuit, which is exciting, but it's also kind of its own thing. Seeing the lines outside the Vista in
Yeah.
my neighborhood in Los Angeles, seeing lines,
At the New
seeing
Beverly or
the New
whatever.
Bev, it's packed. Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
forget what it was. Karina and I tried to go see it at the New Beverly. I think it was like Phantom of the Paradise, and we showed up and it was sold out.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
We
It's
went recently to see Silence of the Lambs, and I mean,
yeah,
me and my wife and some friends we're like in our 30s and 40s, and
yeah,
we're just and everyone around us is young, and a lot of them are seeing it for the first time. I went to the
yeah,
Paramount Theater this summer in Austin,
yeah,
and I went to see There Will Be Blood on 35 millimeter,
yeah.
and this girl was with her boyfriend behind me, and they're like, "I've never seen this film. What is this movie we're about to watch?" And I had
Right.
to turn around, and I'm never usually that person. I'm like,
Yeah.
buckle up, but it does give you hope, right? Even when you see all the things going on, it's got to
Well, it
give you hope, right?
also, yeah, absolutely, it gives you hope, man. But also, I'm also, and maybe this is kind of, I don't know. I feel like cinema is a long way from dying, but when it does, it'll be replaced by something else, and that'll be exciting. When cinema came around, it was kind of like a new thing, and it's shockingly new. It's not an old medium at all. It's a very young medium. So I don't know. I feel like, but I feel excited that right now there is kind of a rising tide of people being psyched about seeing movies.
I'm gonna get you out of here on a fun one
Yeah,
because I got you because we've talked a lot of heavy stuff today,
yeah.
and I'm gonna get you out on a fun one. Um, Confession is a big part of this film.
Oh,
Is a
this
big part
sounds
of you.
fun.
Yes. So I'm curious, Ryan Johnson, if you could sit across from another director, live or dead, and get
Mm,
them to confess the cinematic secrets you've always wanted, but you've never got answered. All those questions you've had bubbling from seeing films up on those
mhm.
screens that you never got answered or don't know. Who would it be and why? And what would be maybe the film or two that you would want to ask them the most about?
Oh man, that's a very, very good question. Uh, I would be, it's interesting. Such a good question. I've been watching, for some reason, I've been just kind of watching and rewatching a bunch of Anthony Mann westerns recently. So
Man,
that's where my brain, yeah, man, indeed. That's where my brain goes, because he, you know, uh, I think it would be really interesting to talk to directors who worked kind of under the studio system and who made work that was and this sounds like a dirty word. It shouldn't be. That was workmanlike and that was craft based and was, you know, the word journeyman is sometimes used as a dirty word, and I don't know if that applies to man or not. I have to think about that. But the notion of talking to them about how they approached each of these, and also his work with Jimmy Stewart, talking about how in terms of those dark, simmering performances, what that relationship was like between the two of them on set. Yeah, and also he seems like he'd be a fun guy to just sit down and have a few drinks with.
it is always interesting, those filmmakers, right? Like I think of Howard Hawks as
Yeah.
somebody that you could say is a journeyman, but also has maybe some of the greatest films in every genre.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the thing. Journeyman is just kind of like a code word for craftsman, I think,
Yes.
And
Oh, I think so too.
I aspire to journeyman status. To
Well,
me,
you are making movies almost in every genre,
yeah.
and they're all great.
Well,
So
yeah, that's to me, that's the fun thing is kind of, I don't know, trying to try your hand at a broad swath of things, and also it has the benefit of keeping you from getting bored, and hopefully it keeps the audience on their toes too.
absolutely. Ryan, this was the best. You're the best. This movie
Well,
is wonderful.
thanks
I
so
can't
much.
wait to see what you're doing next. I think it's maybe a sci-fi film from what I've heard,
Not really sci-fi, no.
or
Yeah, it's a slight element in it, but no, it's really kind of a thriller.
a
Yeah.
thriller. Well, either way,
Yeah, I
that
write it
sounds good.
first, so we'll
Yeah.
see.
Either way, I'm down. Like
All
I've
right.
been bought since brick, and I
All
love
right. Appreciate
everything that
that.
you do. Thank you so much, man.
Take care, man.
My thanks to the great Rian Johnson for that conversation. You can see his latest Knives Out mystery, Wake Up Dead Man, streaming everywhere around the world on Netflix. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you all next time.